Today's project is to make myself a 12-stitch punch card using this pattern. This is card number 1 in many sets, and so whatever happens, this could be alternate stitches of red and blue, it could be some needles tucking and alternate needles knitting, it could be some needles slipping and alternate needles knitting. And this card is card number 1 in many packs and is therefore useful for many things. One of the many things I use it for is testing the patterning on the machine. Because it's so visually predictable, I can read across and down the fabric and spot if there are any errors occurring in a newly repaired machine. But I'm working on a 12-stitch machine, the SK155, and I only have 24-stitch punch card blanks. So here is what I have done to help myself. In the pink marker, I marked every other column of stitches, starting with the second one on the left. It's going to be fed into the punch card this point down, and that's how I've discovered that they work. A 24-stitch card, the last column of holes on the right will fit in, the second column of holes on the left will fit in, and alternate columns in between is what fits in to the 12-stitch card reader. So I'm only going to consider these columns marked in the pink at all when punching holes. Then every other one of those is punched out on one row, and the alternate set of every other one is punched out on the next row. These columns just don't exist. Try to zone them out. It's actually pretty easy because as I begin punching up, I don't really have to circle all these. Once I've gotten a good start down here, it's quite obvious that this one, and so on need to be punched on up. What is not obvious is that the card looks funny to you. Well, it does to me anyway, because I'm very, very familiar with 24-stitch punch cards. And if you are too, you'll see that the proportion you get here is not what we're used to looking at. The reason is this reader is going to read every single row, but only every other column of what we're working with. However, if we get it done right, it should be entirely effective. Here's my card, finished and ready to use, and should you need to make a 12-stitch punch card, do exactly what we did. You might have your blackened squares in different places, doesn't matter, just transfer this design that you drew out to the grid that is on the card, but only use every other column, beginning with the second one as you face it on the left. We're facing it, this is the left edge, 1, 2, and ending with the final column on the right, and you should be fine. I'm starting with the carriage locked on the first row, and when I say that, this is what I mean. The card is rolled into the feeder, and I've pulled this lever forward towards the dot. That shows the first patterning row, but it's not going to pattern because I'm not going to set it up to pattern until I knit the hem. And then I'll push that back. This lever is on S for short or L for long. S will get you the design I have. L will double the length, and we can decide that as we go. Here is the result of knitting Fairisle with the card that we've been working on. And you'll see quickly how much I like it and why. You can easily see that the bottom rows are pretty much all even, but there is one mistake. Let me find it. There you go. See where there's a longer float than others? Shows right up. And up at the top, I've discovered every 12th stitch, we have some extra long floats. So that helps us narrow down a suspicion. Basically, this card works correctly and will make pretty fabric, which I'll show you in a minute. But if it's happening every 12 stitches and we have 12 feelers, and in these drums, readers that run on a rotation of 12, and a card that's every 12th, that runs in a 12-stitch repeat, it's more likely to be one of those things at fault for the occasional mispatterning than something actually in the bed of the machine. So it helps us troubleshoot. Now, looking at the fabric, the most obvious top part of this, I had the card locked on one row, which gives vertical stripes. That is what it's intended to do. The next part, I had it set for double length, so we got 2 rows on every position of punched holes rather than 1. And you can just barely see where I shifted over to the S length, short length, where it changes every row. So it's doing what it's supposed to do, but we have spotted a couple errors that need our attention. Okay, quick bit of information. Have a close look at the card I punched. Notice anything? Possibly that every 12-stitch error could be the forgotten column. We all do this, please forgive me. If I go back and punch those, I'm suspecting a cure will be imminent. And just for your information, imagine this is properly punched. It will be in 5 minutes. It's the equivalent of this card on a 24-stitch machine. That's what they look like, except for the erroneous unpunched column, of course. I got to wondering, how come some areas of my fabric didn't have those errors and some did? I think now we can see. I punched properly at the bottom and had what we call around here a dumb attack and failed to punch one column at the top. So the problem appeared intermittent. As the card rolled, it developed. I will go fix it. You will have noticed that I'm going back and forth between a stockinette hem and Fairisle for the body of this hat. This lever is supposed to be forward for stockinette. Don't forget to push it back to knit Fairisle. So in addition to the changes over here, you have to remember to make the changes over here. And here's the fickle thing. For some reason or other, it will occasionally work if you fail to select the correct position, but then it may stop working mid-project. Better to remember, don't you think? Hem rows are done. Time to push this back, change to knit in, which is what this machine calls Fairisle, and increase the stitch size just a little because Fairisle tends to knit tighter than stockinette. Still troubleshooting, and the problem with the card is solved. We're getting a nice even pattern all the way across, except for on this needle, and it has just shown its evil ways. The latch is stuck underneath the needle hook, so time to change that one. Good news, we're not getting any errors anymore. I did find a couple more needles that were intermittently sticking and creating errors, and I swapped them out with needles on the ends of the machine. You need to be aware that when you have to stop and take out needles, you'll be pushing the sponge bar out, of course, and that is likely to cause you to have to take the carriage off, which is likely to disturb the rotation of these drums. So unless you are successful in being magnificently careful, you may get mispatterning on the row following that, because these drums are what determines the patterning. Another couple of things to remember. This is the forward position we use in stockinette, and as the carriage moves across the direction my finger is pointing, obviously this is forward and out of the way of the needles. So right here is far enough to take the carriage to the right. However, when we are in patterning position, this is involved. See how it is positioned? It cannot properly reorient itself after every row unless you let the whole mechanism clear the last working needle. This was a little bit for me to get used to because this is a wide carriage, wider than the Brother 260 that I normally do bulky Fairisle on. And I have short arms, so I was tending to cut it close. And I really need to work to get this all the way past the last needle. Also, this is not a machine that is meant to knit fast on. A dealer who sold me one of my early machines long ago made a musical reference. And this was to an old passive. She said, "Honey, this is not the minute waltz. This is the Blue Danube." Something else to remember about this. It does a beautiful Blue Danube pace, not so beautiful of a minute waltz pace. So just come to the end of every row, push as far right or left as you need to, take a breath, and then begin to return. Don't try to do it Bugs Bunny style, and you'll be much better off. I'm ready to change to Fairisle, so I've pushed both of those back. Need to go over to knit in and decide what I'm going to do here. I'm going to start with the card locked on one row, so I get vertical stripes. For my second batch of rows, I'm going to do this, the long length, but allow the card to advance. For my third batch, I'm going to do that, and it will graduate the color changes. I'll show you how it comes out in a minute. But here is how I'm starting. And here's what we're getting. This bottom part that's vertical stripes, that's what you get with the card locked on one row. The next section with 2 brown, 2 blue, 2 brown, 2 blue going up, this is the doubled length portion. And the top portion, alternately blue and brown, both directions, vertically and horizontally. That is the S length card advancing. So these are some of the many things you can do with this card and why I like it so much. And by the way, the business of finding that you had more than one problem, a card problem as well as some needle problems in this case, that's typical. That's not the exception to the rule. Very, very often when you have an issue, you have 2 or more issues, so you have to patiently keep looking. These samples won't be wasted. In fact, they're going to be finished to fairly presentable baby hats. But I'm worn out. I'll show you that another day. I have knitted 8 of them, by the way.